Hello and welcome everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. As you can see, I've got a slightly different microphone than I've had in previous weeks. Um, just a temporary one while I get a few things sorted. There's a bit of decorating going on and what have you, so I've put a few of these things away in storage for now, and then hopefully this temporary microphone will be okay and you can hear me fine. So, welcome. My name's Ray, and I'm your host for another episode of Ray for Truth Ministries. This is an interesting one because we're going to be covering um, a bit of a challenge to you atheists out there, and I sent an invite to a large number of atheists, what appears to be a large number, because there's been a lot of people that have watched the invitation. In fact, it's been over 1,000 people, and I have had in previous streams in terms of the content covering atheists and the atheist position and the theist position in terms of challenging some of these beliefs. There's been over three or 400 comments of which I've replied, and it's been a lot of good, for generally good, positive back and forth, which I've appreciated. We haven't agreed. What a surprise! That's okay, but I think it's really good, um, healthy discussion because it's probably the biggest question of all time. Where did we come from? What is the source of life, the source of the universe? It's been a question that's been pondered, discussed, debated uh, since life began, I guess, and all those thousands of years. And there's still hot disputes, discussions with different opinions from different angles. Whether, of course, fundamentally it tends to end up being coming down to one thing, and is it whether it's just some kind of natural process of some sort, or um, whether there is something more sophisticated behind it. Now, for me, that would be God. I would call that sophisticated source God. It doesn't have to be, in terms of your view. If you at least kind of come to the conclusion that the source of the universe needs to be something more than just an empty bit of space or some sort of immaterial substance, energy, whatever, that somehow could orchestrate the universe as we know it. And that's the argument we're trying to put forward. And we're looking for some atheists to hopefully join. I've got the link here in the comments for those that would like to join. I'm more than open to have you on board. Come on board. Obviously, if you come on board, please be respectful and, if possible, try to keep your vocabulary decent. We have obviously an audience which could involve youngsters as well, so we want to be a bit respectful of that. But I'm definitely open to your thoughts and your position. I'd like to know, why do you atheists truly believe not just there's no God? That's kind of the main premise, I guess, for an atheist, is you just don't believe there's enough evidence for God. But it goes one step further. It also tends to suggest that you don't even have the concept agreed that there is some sort of intelligence behind the source of the universe. And you're happy to accept that either, in some cases, some atheists will say that the universe came from nothing, or whatever that means, which is probably the most difficult one to get my head around, or it just comes from some sort of immaterial substance, whether it's energy, whatever it may be, but again, without a mind, without intelligence, it just exists. And then, of course, somehow, as we know, through that energy, it forms some form of material body of some sort. And that's when the theory of the Big Bang kicks in, because then with that material body, there was an explosion. And through that explosion was then the beginning of life. Now, all those steps, I'm kind of saying, okay, I kind of follow it, but I'm just struggling to get my head round how we can explain this. So there are some premises I want to really cover because I think the argument cannot be just simply to refuse you don't believe in God. And I'm going to show you why. And that's one of the things I want to bring up before somebody does join, and hopefully somebody will. If not, we will just go through these details. And this is really for those who really want to think about and ponder over really what is the most sensible and logical explanation for the beginning or the source of a universe. So I've got here a few points. I'm just going to share my screen and bring up these points. And hopefully you can read those. So these are the ones. Why did God got a comment here? Let's see if somebody wants to join. Nobody has come forward yet, but we've got a person saying, "Why did God regulate slavery but not abolish it?" That's a good question. I did cover it in my streams. I can certainly cover it again in a future stream. If you want to come on, Michael, you're more than welcome, and we can talk about it. But fundamentally, we are trying to cover today the source or the beginning of the universe and see what we can make comparisons between what an atheist position is and what, in my case, a theist position is. And some of the things I just want to quickly relay to go over it is, do we believe that the universe came into existence through some kind of random process? So what I mean by that is, do we have a process that if it doesn't include a designer or something with intelligence, then what we do know based on the natural world is therefore it will be some sort of random process, not controlled, not by design and purpose, just an explosion, as you can imagine, over billions of years. It would still necessarily be a random process. The second bit I would like atheists to think about is this thing about rationalism, logic, coherence. We believe, I'm sure you would agree, that does exist in the universe as we know it, and it's always existed as far as we know. And that rationalism, logic, and coherence needs a mind. That's the only place we find these qualities, is in a mind. Would you agree with that? The universe comes under consistent laws. And how can all these laws and constraints exist through a random process? Again, suggesting that they are there for purpose, by design, by a deliberate agent, if you like, to put these things into place. Design requires an intelligent mind. So where we clearly see design in the world that we live in and in the universe, why can we therefore not make the deduction that therefore an intelligent mind was behind it? The existence and creation of logic and reason must come from a transcendent mind. What do I mean by that? So what I'm saying is that where we can see this existence of rationality and logic, that we see is located in the mind, and that is where it needs to, where we see that exists. It doesn't exist outside of the mind. It therefore must come from a mind. That's what we call the transcendent mind. So there must be a mind over and above human mind where this was sourced from. The agent of the mind of these qualities must come from, also from a mind, but more likely to be a superior mind to ours. And we would say, number 7, that the world is grounded in rationality. So it's part of the foundation of life, especially from human life, which is specifically what we're talking about here. And then lastly is just the question, how can the universe come into existence? I'd like to know the answer to this without a designer or mind. What's the process of how that works? So my point is this, with all these points, is to look at what's the most likely. I'm not saying, like I've said in previous weeks, that I'm saying that I have absolute proof there is a God, or there's absolute proof that there is a designer with an intelligent mind behind the universe. But I would say at this point in time, that is what I think is the most likely, based on deductive reasoning. In other words, based on the evidence we have, the best conclusion we can draw is that there must be a minor designer behind the universe based on what we know of the universe. There must be an intelligent mind within that designer, that source of the universe, because we have a mind with intelligence, with rationality and logic that only sits within the mind. It's not something that is material that you can put into the material world and demonstrate it. We just know it exists. It's within us, because that's how I can talk to you and have a discussion and logically discuss and debate, because it's a concept in our mind. If it was just a random process, these qualities realistically wouldn't exist. It just doesn't fit the model, if you like, doesn't fit the logical process of determining where the source of these qualities come from. It realistically, more likely, should come from a mind, and therefore, what mind is that? So it could be another human, but then again, the problem with a human is that we all know we had a beginning. We know we're very limited. We're still not intelligent enough, even after all these thousands of years, to be able to recreate the universe. So back then, it couldn't have been a human. We know that time and space and materiality all must have existed at the same time. And like we said, it must have had a beginning for that reason, as well as we know with the expanding universe. Again, it all points back to a beginning. So as much as we could maybe debate about what that beginning is, the thing I would say to that is, whatever that beginning is, at least can we come to some sort of logical understanding to derive on what is the best explanation for that beginning. Now, what we would agree, and I'm sure you atheists would agree, is whether you believe there's a God or shall we say, an intelligent source behind the universe, whatever that is, must have always existed. We know about infinite regression. We know that whatever has a beginning, where does that come from? And generally, we know whatever has a beginning has a cause. More simply, we're saying anything that has a beginning, what brought it into existence? It can't just happen on its own. It must have had something that helped it along, if you like, to bring it into existence. And we have no examples. This is the important bit. We have no examples of anything coming into existence without some sort of help, some sort of agency, if you like. We have no examples, which is why that's a very weak argument to say that it just came into existence. It had to come in existence from something, some source. The question is what is that source, and what is the most likely? Is it just, as I said, some sort of energy, immaterial existence that just was always there, which is fine that it always existed. That makes sense because of this infinite regression theory. But is it more likely it comes from an immaterial existence that has no mind, has no intelligence, but just is there as some form of energy or whatever it may be, and then we have the universe? Because what we're seeing, and what makes more sense, is it's because of the way we are as humans with the mind that we have, is it suggests more likely it comes from a source that does have an intelligence, does have a mind, and has a purpose, a will to create the universe. For me, the most logical conclusion is it cannot be random. If it was just simply random with no design, no intelligence, just simply what we would say some sort of energy, whatever it may be, to then eventually turn into or be converted into some form of material substance, that just exploding to answer the universe we have has got to be the weakest explanation of the beginning of the universe. And that's why I say God is a good option. It's a valid option because it says that the source of the universe does come from something that has an intelligent mind. I want to say that's exactly why I'm bringing these points together, because that for me is a much more likely explanation. Now, there are some extra steps to this. Of course, once we say, okay, we do believe that the universe more likely came from an intelligent source, that doesn't necessarily mean God. And that's correct. That's right. It doesn't. But what evidence do we have of anything out there that we would say that would be at the very beginning to explain how the universe came about, and something that must have always existed and had the potential to create? Now, some people do go through and talk about existing other planets or other universes, but that just really doesn't really solve anything, because then you still have the same question: where did those come from? And you can't just have infinite universes, because again, if universes just exist and somehow there's always some sort of existence of a universe, where does the order come in it? Where does the intelligence come into it to create what we see in the world today, especially us humans with the minds that we have? Um, just you just can't get to an answer. So again, you still have that same issue. So it still begs that question: what type of intelligence are we aware of? So the reason why I say God is a good explanation is because there is some evidence for God. There is, of course, a book that came out thousands of years ago with a case for God, i.e., the Bible. There are, of course, other religions as well making all sorts of claims. And I know a lot of atheists say, well, there are thousands of religions and gods out there. And that's true. There are thousands of gods out there with various belief systems attached to it. But are they real gods? Are they what we say true gods, or not? So how can we determine that? And they say, well, it's so confusing. Who's to say which one? But there is a way to do that. There is again another form of deductive reasoning that would allow the way to determine which religions are true. And it's a process of elimination, really, is what I'm saying. You can eliminate many gods because of the way it came about and the history behind it and the teachings behind it. You can eliminate that, and you will end up with a very short list. And I would say the case for God is very strong, and that would be something I would be more than happy to cover in one of my streams in one of the weeks. We do have a comment here. How do you conclude the universe was designed? Very simply, is because when we look at anything in the world, wherever you look at a very, I don't know, like a very sophisticated building, a ship, a car, because of what it is and how when you investigate and look at the quality behind it, the complexity behind it, we would always agree it came from a designer. So when there is evidence of a great deal of design in it, because it's very complex, it's very sophisticated, it couldn't have just happened by random processes, because it's too collectively sophisticated for it to just, I mean, like you take a bit of material and just burn it and put it in, I don't know, the middle of the street and leave it there for billions of years, you're not going to get a motor car appearing from it, even if it's got the material of a motor car. It won't. A motor car won't appear. The logic is when you have something that is collectively well put together, because there's lots of sophistication to it, there's a lot of complexity to it, always points to his designer. So as much as the natural world, of course, has internal processes which will be self-sustaining, that is not the question that I'm trying to raise here, but is where does that start? If you're talking about the very beginning of life, to kickstart life, which we know every cell has a very sophisticated, complex setup in terms of its DNA, etc. demonstrates that it's not some basic simple cell. It's a very sophisticated cell, which then at that point, at the very, very beginning of life, would suggest a designer. And that's why we make the conclusion, the deductive conclusion, it must come from a designer, because a designer is somebody that can go in and put together something that complex, that precise, in such an orderly fashion, compared to the alternative, which is what, some sort of random process. And we're not talking about life itself, because once life exists, with the ingredients it has in the DNA and everything else that goes with it, that then can go through some sort of evolutionary process. I'm happy to accept that to some degree, but it doesn't explain the beginning. So that we're not saying, well, something in life doesn't have a design, it just happens. Yes, because it happened from something previously that was already in place, because it's self-sustaining. It's a bit like if I design a robot, but in that way I design a robot, I give it enough intelligence and enough ability to build robots. So you could say from that one robot, you could then see thousands of robots appearing. But that doesn't mean robots down the road, there was any designer behind it. No, because all it was just the previous robot building it based on the previous robot. But it has to start somewhere. The very first robot had to be designed. So yes, what we're saying here is what we do know in life. Anything that is complex has a designer. The bit we don't know is, how did life come about? My point is, what we know of the universe, it's again very, very sophisticated, far more sophisticated than a motor car, far more sophisticated than anything that we know of. Okay, so why does that not have a designer compared to not? That's my point. That's the reason why I conclude, um, yes, motor cars can't reproduce. That's fine, but that's not my argument. My argument is, how did a motor car come about? From a designer. Anything we see in the world in terms of things that were made come from a designer. Um, so we're not talking about the natural world in terms of natural process, because it has a self-sustaining ability um, to exist. But we are talking about things that are made or created, if you like, always has a design of it. You will never have an example of where you take a bit of material with no design behind it and it turns into something very sophisticated. It just doesn't happen. Anything that we see, like in terms of life, uh, that turns into something sophisticated, because it has something built in already. But whatever that was built in, like in cells, it'll be DNA. How did that DNA get there in the first place? So that's when we're talking about life. We have to go to the very beginning and say, the very beginning of life, what is more likely to come from a non-intelligent, an immaterial way, or from something that has design, has intelligence behind it? That's kind of my point. The universe always existed. Now, huge problems with this is the science just simply doesn't come to this conclusion, based on a whole bundle of things which I did cover on previous weeks. And if you do your research, you will find there are, very, very strong evidence that there must have been a beginning to the universe. The universe is expanding. There's also other science research that's been done, all point to a beginning. Um, so that's why we say there's a beginning. And of course, um, if the universe always existed, then you've got the issue of how do you explain that? How do you explain that a universe could always have existed? The problem is if the universe always existed, don't forget that would have been when man would have been very basic at the time, because obviously we've advanced over the years and got much, much, much better through a learning process. Back then, we certainly wouldn't have had much to say about how the universe came about. So again, it still begs the question, how does the universe, with all what we know of it now, knowing how incredibly complex, how incredibly ordered it is and precise it is, come under so many rules and laws that have to be so precise, suggest that just comes from always been there. It's for me, again, it just doesn't answer the question unless you've got some evidence to prove that. That's really just, again, you've got to have some evidence. You can't just make that comment, just say it always existed. I'd like to see some evidence behind it. What's the basis? What's the deductive reasoning that you can put forward to draw that conclusion? That's what I'd like to see. Scientists are going to work. Yeah, scientists can carry on working for how life began, but they're not going to solve it in your lifetime, very likely. So then what happens? If the answer can be found in your lifetime and there is a God, then you don't want to lose the opportunity of the benefit that provides. That's really my point, because if you just say, okay, I'm going to rely on science, but if science hasn't got the answer, it's going to be too late, because you would have been gone and past, your life would have been ended, and then you'd be looking on to what? Some hope that somehow there's still going to be life after death, but no scientist agrees with that, because they say when you die, you die. That's it. It calls you decompose. You're just going to be matter. You're not going to be the person you are. So again, how could that then be changed and transformed in some way to bring your life back through natural causes? Just doesn't make any sense, because I said intelligence always seems to point to a source that would explain these kind of events. Of course, the difficulty is the very beginning of the universe is the most complex of all, the biggest challenge of all that we are aware of, because it would require the creation of planets and putting in the right order, and all the life has to be set in a precise way to put that case forward. Then that's the evidence that we've got to work on. Now, the comments by Mr. Robert, whatever your name is, Robert, you're making these comments, but you're just making statements. You're not really providing any backup. You're just saying there is no this, there is no that. That's not good enough. I'm not interested in people just say, no, there is no God. No, there's not this. No, you have no evidence. We can all say that. We can all make claims. I want atheists to take a little bit more responsibility and say, okay, provide me with an explanation that can explain how this universe came about without intelligence, without a designer. What is the atheist's position to explain how the universe came from either nothing or something similar to nothing, like some sort of energy? That is the general consensus of most atheists. Of course, there are different views depending which atheist you speak to. So I don't know whether this particular atheist, Robert, you believe the universe always existed. Again, you need to provide the evidence for it. What science have you got? Because don't forget, the universe is material, so you could study the universe to see whether there is a case for it to always existed, and then provide that evidence. Because the majority of the evidence that I've provided, which is directly from the major scientists that we know, these are the experts, not you, Robert. I don't think you probably fall in the category of being one of these experts. That's their conclusion. The majority is that the universe had a beginning. So when you take that into account, that must therefore be the most likely explanation, that the universe had a beginning. Just because the world is, it's a laughable this, but I don't know if you want to join, Robert. You're more than welcome, but you would have to try and explain some of this for me. It would help. Just because the world is wonderful doesn't mean there is God. And I agree. That doesn't prove it. But as I said, I'm not here to prove there is a God. I can't prove there is a God, but I can put a case that I think God is the more likely deductive explanation for the universe, for life. And therefore, I think it's worth pursuing. It's not a case I've got the evidence. I don't have it. I can't show you God in front of everybody. And I think like even some atheists agreed. They were interviewed. I've been watching some of these interviews, and they said even if God turned up in their doorstep in front of them and showed himself, they'd probably still not believe it's some illusion, some trick. So what evidence would you want? Would you require that would convince you? Now, I know you didn't say, Robert. I'm just saying there are atheists that do believe the universe existed. So that was one of your questions. So are you Are you actually agreeing that the universe had a beginning? Do you want to just put a yes to that at least, so at least we can move forward? I mean, it'd be better if you could join, and I'd be more than happy to bring you on if you'd be respectful. We can have a lovely conversation. I really will respect your point of view. We may not agree, but that's fine. I just would like to hear some kind of explanation from an atheist position, because at the moment I've not really heard much. I've heard a lot of no's, it can't be this, it can't be that, prove this, prove that. That used to be sort of default position of many atheists to say, well, I don't have to prove anything. You just have to prove to me there's a God. Well, what that really means is you're not interested in trying to find the answer. I'm not interested in people that are not trying to find the answer. Okay, I do need to provide some evidence there is a God, and I agree, and I have been doing that in the episodes I've been covering. I've been putting that out there. But the atheist has got to take some responsibility to find and provide an answer for why they believe what they do believe. Because you can't just say, I don't believe in a God. Because are you saying that you don't believe that there was an intelligent source? So let's put God aside for a second and just say, do you believe there was an intelligent source or not? And if you do not believe there's an intelligent source, what do you believe is the source of the universe? Is it just some sort of energy? And somehow that then became material, and then from that, the Big Bang, because the Big Bang is a pretty much agreed event. Most scientists will agree, and in fact, even most Christians would at least accept that there was a Big Bang. That doesn't mean there wasn't a God, because obviously the God would be the one who did the bang of the Big Bang and put it into place, if you like. So there could easily have been an explanation, sorry, not explanation, an explosion um, in the universe from where original matter started to then be the universe we got. The only difference is that if God is behind it, then we have an intelligent source that then would make more sense to bring that explosion into some sort of order and some sort of design, because there's a designer with intelligence behind it. And that's simply my point. Am I not making myself clear? And is that not a sensible explanation compared to the alternative? No intelligence, no design, just explosion, billions of years. Let's just keep sticking billions of years on it, and eventually we'll get the universe. Nowhere in science do we have any evidence of anything of that nature through some sort of random process of just material exploding to turn into something sensible and life itself. No example whatsoever. Let me make it even easier. We have no example of non life becoming life. So why is that therefore an option? It's a poor option for me, because life comes from life, because there's design in life. That's my point. That's why it's self-sustaining, because it has the DNA in it, has the code, if you like, that has the credentials, the criteria to then create life from life. So life from life makes sense. We can see that biologically how that works. We see that scientifically proven, no problem at all. That all makes sense. Where you can look through the history books of how life came about and how the understanding of life, especially at a sort of macro level, we can see why we now have the science behind it. We have studied cell structures and what's within a cell. It all makes sense. The only question remaining is, how did the very first cell come about? That is the question, not life thereafter, because that's part of an internal process, if that makes sense. Yeah, bigger audience, yeah, sure. I agree, Robert. What doesn't help is many atheists are a bit shy to come on. I mean, that will come. I mean, there is a lot of people listening to me. I had over 2,000, I think over 3,000, in fact, views on some of the material I put out. The streams, not so much, but a lot of the other material, I put a lot of shorts out, and people are responding. It does take time, and that's fine, but at the end of the day, I'm just hoping that those who do watch it, and there is quite a few that people do watch it, and certainly my shorts as well, and it's not just me. I'm just doing my little bit. I don't mind if there isn't a big audience. I believe strongly that I have a case. I do believe there's a God, because for me, God is personal. I've experienced God in my life. I've had amazing things happen to me. I've been healed on the spot by a prayer to God. And you have billions of people with testimonies of how their life was transformed by the same God that I'm believing in. And that's part of the case. And this can't be ignored, whether you believe it or not. It just cannot be ignored. There are so many supernatural things that science just cannot explain. It really cannot. And sometimes you have to think, well, maybe science isn't always the place to go. We like it when it's useful and when it does have explanations, because it's very good at examining the material world, but it's not very good going beyond that. It doesn't really understand consciousness. It doesn't really understand how the mind works. The fact we have this rationality, this, coherence in logical thought. Because if we're just a random process, that type of mind shouldn't exist, really, in theory. It should just be, just random blobs of energy and matter coming together, and it would be a much more simplified effect. It should be, to be honest, it should be not much different than sort of the vegetation that we see on the world. We should be just part of that. But because what we see in the world is far more sophisticated, especially when it comes to humans with this logical, rational mind, it just completely goes against science as we know it. And science has no answer to this. So it's one of those dilemmas which you have to ask yourself. And this is where it does get difficult. And I would accept this for atheists. How do you deduce the source of the mind, the source of intelligence that we see, and order and everything else that goes with it, if it wasn't that it came from something that had those qualities? Like I said at the beginning, like here, without a mind, what would we be? And if we do have a mind, that which we obviously do, I'm sure we all agree we have a mind, and we have an amazing mind to be able to rationalize and logically think through things, that why can't we believe that that was sourced from something even with a greater mind, of course, but we're having the same qualities? The Bible does talk about how God created man in his image. What that means is that God created man with similar qualities to himself. And that would make a lot of sense, because we should expect the source of the universe to have the qualities that relate to what we see in the world today. And I think humans have got to be the focal point on that, because we are the most sophisticated creature that exists by far. No other creature can act and work like humans, and you will never see a dolphin or whatever build and create things that man has created. I mean, man is just in terms of all the levels and all the qualities of mankind, it's far superior to any other animal. That doesn't mean animals don't have certain qualities better than us, because some have better hearing than us, they have sonar, some may be quicker, faster, whatever. All have different traits where they are superior in certain ways, but overall nothing comes close to humankind. We have this unique ability to be able to think, process logic, design, create, build incredibly sophisticated worlds. Look at the way we have improved the universe, not the universe so much, but improved the earth that we live in. We've also made lots of mistakes as well, for sure, but we can see potentially how amazing we are. Now, that's interesting there. You said that minds get more complex over time as a survival mechanism. Well, this is where I beg to differ. And this is where we have to be a bit careful here, Robert. I do agree with you that minds are getting better because we're learning from each other. It's like a learning process. Like, if I know that a very clever formula works, now I know it. I don't have to go back and retest it. I know it works. It's a great formula. But then if I come up with a very clever formula to solve a certain mathematical issue, Now I have two formulas, and of course, those two formulas I can write down and record, and the third person doesn't have to research those. They've already been provided. He comes up with a new formula. So we are learning from each other and we're progressing over time. We see that in the world. We see that humans are getting better because we're learning from each other. That's got nothing to do with any kind of natural survival process. It's purely the intelligence of our mind being able to absorb information, record it, store it, learn from it, and add to it. That's completely separate to our survival, instincts, if you like. Let me explain that a bit more. Maybe this will help you understand this a bit better, Robert. In terms of survival, and this is what we call survival of the fittest, we use this kind of process that we as humans have got this certain innate ability to survive as part of our natural makeup. To some degree, I would agree. There is something about us that does have this natural survival. The reason being is we want to live, we enjoy life, and we want to live. But it's a bit subjective because of the way we operate. We're not just operating in just a purely natural sphere like some animals are. It is with animals, I would agree, there is kind of just survival because it's more kind of basic in the way that they operate. But we don't do that. We operate in a way where we can step away and say, wait a minute, even though that's naturally, for example, we could say the survival of humankind would be what we call human flourishing. And that this was actually quite a dangerous area to look into because it would mean that people could say, well, if we as a human race was going to be improving, being more superior, one of the ways you could do that was a form of culling. You could look at the Nazi regime as one example, where Hitler was saying that he wanted to purify mankind. And that you could say fits nicely into survival of the fittest, because if you remove deficiencies from humankind, and there is an element of this, of course, because in the DNA, we do pass it on through hereditary. So if you come from a family that had some sort of blood defects, for example, and then you have offsprings from that family that had that defect, there's a very good chance that that defect will be passed on through the generations. So if you want to really go down that road of survival of the fittest, it would really mean in practice that there would be a process where you would be killing off or removing or preventing any kind of progress of life that isn't fitting that standard, if you like. So it would be, okay, who determines the standard? Well, that's another issue. Okay, if you've got certain genetic defects, you can say, well, that's clearly not good. We don't want those to survive. Shall we wipe them out? That would fit your survival of the fittest. Then we would look at, do certain nationalities suggest that they're better or whatever? What are your criteria of defining what is the better a better person? Is it because they're more stronger, fitter, more intelligent? What's your criteria? And it's going to be very, very subjective. And it's also going to be, more importantly, Robert, very unfair. Can you imagine in your life, all of a sudden, you have a car accident, somebody hits you with a car by accident, or maybe they drunk quite a lot and they were careless, they weren't paying attention and whatever, and they decide to drive home, even though they've drank a few bits, because their faculties aren't as sharp. They didn't see you, hit you, and hit your side of you, and basically damaged your left leg in so severely that you ended up having it to be amputated. They couldn't. They couldn't. They could just about keep you alive, keep your life, but they couldn't keep your leg. You had to lose your leg, and now you would be, now for no fault of your own, now being somebody that would be seen as a impure or weaker individual. So maybe you should be then removed because now you don't deserve to be part of this survival of the fittest, because we want the fittest. We want the best for humankind to survive in the fittest. You now don't qualify because you're now have a defect. Do you see where I'm going with this? It's just completely ridiculous when you think about it properly, that as humankind, we have this ability to appreciate everybody, respect everybody. And if you really think about it, why should we have any bias or partiality just because somebody is weaker than somebody else in certain regards. It doesn't make them any less human. And I would say the best way to look at it is we should all look at each other equally. And not only by doing so, it also helps build us stronger and closer together. There's a much better, shall we say, love and care for each other if we treat each other equally. But if we start going down this road that thanks, Robert. Anyway, I appreciate your comments. Appreciate you at least turning up, even though you didn't want to jump on. But thank you for your. You're always welcome. Or I do appreciate your comments, mate. It's okay that we agree to disagree. I just hope you're at least getting my points here. This survival of fittest is a very dangerous thing, and it clearly isn't the case. We're not allowing natural causes to develop the human race. It's our independent thinking, our mind, our learning from each other is the factor that brings life, advances life. But it doesn't always work. In some areas we are weaker. It hasn't been a great success. There's been a lot more disease. There's a lot more other strange things that are going on in the world which impact humankind. There's been a lot of disasters, a lot of new things that have really ruined the world, ruined the earth, and that's had an impact on humankind. So if we don't use our brains and we just survive and live, then we wouldn't really progress like you think. We need our mind, and that's the uniqueness of it. And of course, every mind is different. There is no clear one consistent mind there where we would agree on this is the best way forward. This is what is best for humankind. There is no such way at all. I mean, that's just clearly obvious for me, and I'm sure it is for most people, that this whole survival of fittest works for some animals. Yes, I agree, but not for humans. Humans are unique where this does not work, and you can't go down that approach. It's a very dangerous approach because you then starting to marginalize certain individuals. You're starting to place certain people above others, and who are you to say who should be better? If people start to get weaker and have issues, should you remove them because they're not going to help the human race? It would be a very, very evil and very dangerous world to live in if that was the attitude, if that became law. Can you imagine it? The fear you would have if something happened to you, you then wouldn't qualify for life, and then they would have a reason to remove you. Now, we do agree some of that does make sense, and that is on regards to crimes and evil. If people are committing crimes, justice needs to be called. They need to be punished in some way because they are directly, unfairly affecting others. If you see a murderer that goes around killing people with no, shall we say, justifiable cause, we know the courts come forward and they say, yes, I'll throw the book at you because you don't deserve whatever, because the way that you committed those crimes is completely unacceptable. And we want to protect humankind from that basis. And therefore, they would either go to jail for life, or in some cases, they'd have the death penalty. But there will be justice served. And we agree with that because we don't want innocent people being harmed. So that's my answer to that anyway. So we still go back to these questions. I still don't have, from an atheist, a sensible answer to, where does rationality and logic come from if it only exists in the mind? Why can it not therefore logically come from a mind from the very beginning? What I would call a transcendent mind, a superior mind that would have the ability with that level of superiority in their mind to be able to create the universe and bring in the type of mind that we have as humans, because natural processes wouldn't explain the way that our mind works as humans. And that's the gap, if you like, in trying to explain that it purely comes about by natural causes. We have no example of whatsoever of just some random natural process without a mind or intelligence behind it producing anything like an intelligent mind as we know. That's the evidence you've got to work with. You have none. So the fact that we exist with a mind That's the best evidence there must have been a mind that put this all together in the first place. And again, these are just some of the logical inferences, if you like, that I've deduced based on what we know. And I would like to see if any you atheists out there could put a sensible argument to say why anything that I've said doesn't make sense and why. Don't just tell me it's, like most atheists tend to do, is just say, no, that's not true. That don't make sense. That's rubbish. Anyone can do that. Anyone without much of a brain can make comments like that. But give me your reasons why you don't think it makes sense. Why do you think it can't be from an intelligent designer? That's really my point in time. I think I'm going to probably close for now, because as it stands, we still do not have any, shall we say, brave atheists who would like to come on. I'm saddened, Robert, you didn't want to join me. You were more than welcome. Not sure what the issue is, whether you really don't care whether we get to the truth of where we came about and whether it really matters to you. Because don't forget, you do have a very short life. And then what happens? When your life ends, hopefully you have a good life and it can continue for as long as it possibly can. It will come to an end eventually. And then what? If there is a God and there is a way that you can receive more to life than this, then you're going to be rather gutted when you find out, because you will find out if there is a God, you will find out at the last end of your life, because God does say he will make himself known to everyone in one way, through judgment. But I would rather have known him where that judgment is eternal life rather than not. And of course, by that time, it'd be too late to do anything about it. That's why it's so important, because it's not just hinging over trying to find the source of the universe. But if there is a God, for which there clearly is for me, and millions of, if not billions of Christians around the world, is a strong case that they believe there is a God, because they have a God experience in their life, which is consistent across many Christians in how they experience God. And of course, the Bible and the evidence of how we support the evidence for God. That cannot be ignored. And that's why we make the effort to reach out to people, because it is more than just finding the source of the universe. It's also more about finding whether there's more to life than what we know. That's it then. Okay. For those who do get time to watch it, hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully I will get more of an audience in time. It's okay, Robert. I won't lose sleep if I don't get a big audience. I do many different things to reach out to people. I don't just do streams. I do shorts as well. I do speak about my faith to others. And also I do from time to time get out there and on the street and share my faith to others as well. So there are many different ways that I do reach out, and it's fine that there isn't much of an audience for now. I am getting a lot of people on the shorts that I do. I've had now over, as I said, over 2,000 views. So that's been very, very, very encouraging. So it's certainly getting there, and of course, I'm not going to give in. I will continue to persevere. Because it's worth it. And I only do this because I have love for you, love for everybody, that if there is a God, which I do believe there is, and he can even offer you eternal life, I would like everyone out there to receive that gift as well. And that's the reason why I do it. All right. If you are still listening, Robert, thanks for your comments. I do appreciate them. And appreciate your kind words and saying good luck with that. And cheers. So thank you, Robert. I do respect you, and thank you for at least being there to throw in some comments to make it a bit more interesting. I do get, actually, outside of the stream itself, a whole bundle of additional comments. And I've, as I said, over 300, and I've replied pretty much to everybody. I think, Robert, you've been on there as well, and I think I've replied to pretty much all your comments. And so that's something I like to do and will continue to do, because I do like to discuss this matter. And that's one of a good way to do that. All right, that's enough for tonight. Those who've enjoyed watching, thanks for watching. Until next time, until next week. I'm not sure what I'm doing next week yet, but in the meantime, you might see me on a few more shorts in the meantime. So have a great day, great evening, and God bless. Take care. Bye bye.